Mr. Howell to say.
We're all set.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Wyndham Raymond School District Board of Directors meeting. It is 6:30 on Wednesday, October 7th, 2020, and we are in the Zoom video conferencing. Mr. Howell?
Kate Briggs.
Here.
Jenny Butler.
Here.
Janie Cummings.
Here.
Marge Gavoni.
Here.
Pete Hensler.
Here.
Anna Keeney.
Here.
Kate Levier.
Here.
Scott McLean.
Here.
Christina Small.
Here.
And Molly Cochran.
I don't think she heard.
Molly's here.
Okay. All right. This is the time that we have the Pledge of Allegiance, and as per usual, we mute ourselves so that one person can recite the pledge. Tonight we have Bill Diamond doing the pledge for us, our senator.
Oh, nice. I'm going to ask my wife, Jane, to join me. Is that okay?
Oh, that's wonderful. Because will you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Okay, now it's a time. Oh, before I do that, are there any adjustments to the agenda, Mr. Howell?
Annie, we don't have any adjustments tonight.
Thanks. All right, now it's time for public input, which is an opportunity for the public to comment on items not on the agenda. Do we have any public? Okay. Now we'll pass to the outdoor volleyball court. Mr. Howell?
Sure. Tonight's an opportunity for us to thank some members of the public for stepping up, stepping out, and providing a wonderful, wonderful resource for our girls volleyball team. And think back to a couple of weeks ago when Maine CDC and the Department of Education said any indoor sports for the fall season weren't going to happen. And possibility of a season in March. But other than that, girls were welcome to practice for volleyball, but there was no opportunity to play, to have any sort of a competition. So Rich came and met with me and talked about, well, we've got a spot on the outside of the softball field and maybe down where the football team practices where we can put up a net and allow the girls to practice. And so we were trying to work out some plans, and Senator Diamond shot me a quick email and said, I know some people who have some equipment and some time to volunteer, and they would absolutely love to help out the girls volleyball team to give them a space to play. And so over the past couple weeks, Senator Diamond and Tim Tanberg and Danny Shaw and Scott Simons really stepped up with equipment that they have, with lending us some of their personnel and also donating materials to build for our girls what I think is probably the best outdoor volleyball court in Southern Maine. It is absolutely amazing. Had a chance to go and visit it yesterday when they were finally putting up the stanchions. And it is an amazing, amazing addition to our facility that was completed in a short period of time. And so wanted to invite Senator Diamond, Tim Tanberg, and Dan Shaw, and Scott Simons to come, and just first of all, for thank you, but to just recognize you for that amazing piece. I do have a letter that Rich forwarded to me from the girls volleyball team, so if okay, I'm gonna go ahead and read that. Thank you so much for your donations. From all the seniors, we truly appreciate the thought of us. We cannot wait to use this court in the future, and I believe the future starts tomorrow. With everything going on this year, the small things really matter, and they're right, the small things do matter. And your acts of kindness will forever be cherished. Many people in the future will use this court and think of the hard year that 2020 was, but they will remember all the good memories that were made with friends. Again, thank you so much from the 2020-2021 volleyball team. And the team has a signed game ball from all the team members for all of you. So Tim and Senator Diamond will find a time where we can connect and get those to you. But it's with very deep appreciation from the girls and the RSU 14 community. Thank you so much for this wonderful facility. It will be used for years to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time.
We
Rich, if
certainly
I'm
do.
correct, that tomorrow the girls will have a chance to use it?
Yeah, excuse me. For the first time, they'll be out there tomorrow night at 5:30. And usually when the coach has been arriving to practice, recently his vehicle is loaded with nets and stakes and everything else. So this is definitely a very, very nice gesture. And the kids are very excited. I passed 2 volleyball players today in the hallway and they looked at me. They didn't say a word and they went like this, like that. So I gave them that and they were very, very happy. So thank you.
Yep.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Bill, do you want to say something?
Well, Madam Chair, I would just like to say how fantastic Tim Tanberg was. You know, I approached him and he just right out of the quick said, yes, absolutely. And then after that, he was there with his crew, Steve and Greg and Pickle, and they were there for almost a full week. And their contribution to this community goes on, but this was just one more example. Danny Shaw came in with 130 yards of crushed stone. And when I called him up during the day, he said, sure. And that was that conversation and that was over. And then Scott Simons met with him and he just said, I'll call Timmy tomorrow and we'll work it out. So it was, I think we can be very proud of these 3 guys and their businesses and all they do for this community. I just want to say thank you personally to them and so being so willing to help our community and help our kids. This is a big deal for the kids. They need some positive things happening and God bless these guys for coming in and doing all they did so unselfishly.
Again, I echo everyone else's thank you very, very much to everybody involved. Okay, we'll move on then. Thank you
All right.
very much.
Take care.
Thank you, Tim.
Yep.
Tim?
Enjoy.
Jane,
Bye.
good seeing you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good seeing you.
Chris. Good job.
We'll now move on to Gender Equity Title IX training for board members. And I'm going to introduce Alan Kropp from Drummond Woodson.
Thanks, Janie. Nice to see you all. A pleasure to be with all of you, to hear that story and what's happened with regard to the volleyball court. What a neat thing. And the more and more positives you hear these days, we'll take all of them because of all the challenges. Although I have the honor of working closely with Chris and Christine on a number of different issues. And I can say I have some sense from my conversation of a lot of good things that are going on, even under the circumstances in the district and the dedication of your staff and employees and administrators and you know, working through what has just obviously been an incredibly difficult time since last March with unfortunately not an end in sight. On top of those positive aspects to it, I've been asked to talk about a topic that isn't super positive, but I understand the necessity as you got some policies that came before the committee recently to adopt under Title IX as it relates to some new rules that were issued by the federal government. And so again, kudos to Christine and Chris and your entire committee there, amongst Janie, Lisa Garneau, Kate, I think as well, right? Others that were on that committee sort of working through that. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then there's actually, and you're probably aware of this as long board members, anybody who's been on the board for a bit, is there is a state law requirement around gender equity training for all school board members that tends to be provided annually. There's different ways in which to do that, so we're going to touch on that fairly quickly here as well. You'll keep me abreast of time, Janie. I've sort of planned 30 to 40 minutes, but I can go less if I need to. So we'll just make sure that we're not running over too much. I will share my screen briefly here. Let's see if I can do that. And I might toggle back and forth in terms of sharing that. Did that show up?
Not yet. It says you've started it. There you go.
Okay, it's there.
Yes.
And I think board members might have received, Christine, right?
Yes.
A handout version of this.
Yes.
That would, okay. And so you can follow along and we can talk through it, but let me give you a little bit of sort of what this whole thing is about. What happened was, as much as I just mentioned, schools across Maine, across the country, dealing with so much in terms of addressing pandemic-related issues and remote learning and so forth. The U.S. Department of Education that oversees enforcement of Title IX, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, determined that they would issue their final regulations for regarding obligations of schools, colleges, and universities in addressing matters of sexual harassment. So as I said, I'm not here to talk about a very positive topic, but at the same time, I have a sense of the structures and the efforts to which RSU 14's gone to make sure that they're prepared to meet the obligations that the federal government's imposed on them, and talk a little bit about what's behind the policies that I think you each reviewed. And then I'll be happy to take questions as we go through. In any event, just very quickly, Title IX, I think folks probably have some familiarity, and actually talking about the volleyball court probably is timely as far as this presentation. For years and years, Title IX was understood as the law that dealt with athletics, right? And meant providing equal athletic opportunity for girls relative to boys. And Title IX has had huge impact over the last several decades since it was passed in the 1970s to essentially assure that girls get very similar high quality athletic programs relative to boys. And all you have to do in normal times, but now as well, is go out to a field and look and see what goes on across the school district in terms of the quality of your girls' athletic programs, and recognize, Title IX had something to do with that from some time ago. There's still issues that come up every now and then with regard to athletics, but Title IX has really had a monumental impact in that regard. But what got less consideration, and people don't tend to always focus on, is that Title IX actually is broader than just sports in terms of what it addresses. It essentially ensures that there will be no form of sex or gender-based discrimination against anybody affiliated with the school. So whether it's students, employees, administrators, and so forth, basically to say men and women, or those who might identify differently, we'll talk a little bit about gender identity and issues and so forth, are entitled to the same opportunities as everybody else, and cuts across all school programs. One of the very specific, and this goes to really the focus of this training, is that Title IX also prohibits, federal case law establishes the fact that any sexual harassment, any sex-based harassment involving bullying or harassment of a sexual nature is a form of sex-based discrimination and has to be addressed under Title IX. And the regulations that the Department of Education issued address solely sexual harassment issues. They don't change anything or speak at all to athletics or other program options or other forms of discrimination. It is purely a law or a rule that the federal government says, here's what schools have to follow when it comes to dealing with sexual harassment under Title IX. That's essentially what was issued. I show you this visual only because this was when we printed out the regulations when they were issued. This is what it looked like, which was about 2,000 pages. It's not 2,000 pages of regulations. There's only about 25 or 30 pages of those. But the federal government has this way when they issue prominent rules of writing a lot of commentary of explaining what they intended in each of these things. So we spent a good amount of time over the summer, digesting all of this. I am going to do it in 15 minutes for all of you. that hopefully is useful enough. So I think, as I mentioned, and I know you went through from your policy committee and then did an adoption of these 5 policy updates, all of which are policies or procedures that you already had posted and had gone through approval process there in the district. But because of these new regulations, they required changes. And so some of the changes, you know, I'm going to hone in on just a couple. I mean, the first one, that AC is a statement of non-discrimination, and that's the requirement that, of course, the school district specifies that in all of its programs and all of the activities that it conducts, there shall be no discrimination on the basis of sex or race, color, national origin, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, and I might have missed a couple. So you can know from AC, there's an updated sort of broad-based, all protected categories. Of course, we are all about equal opportunity for those who participate in our school. Then there are 2 other categories. There's student policies. That's the next 2, this ACAA and then this ACA-R. And then there's 2 that relate to employees, ACAB and ACAB-R. They actually address harassment on any basis. So if your school's dealing with a racial harassment issue, it would still fall within these policies and procedures. But they had to be updated extensively because of the Title IX regulation. Next, here's what the bottom line to what the rule was, is that the federal government said, we're going to give you very clear definitions of what would be considered sexual harassment under Title IX. And they gave these 3 definitions of quid pro quo refers to conditioning, employee conditioning some sex-related behavior in order for somebody to get a benefit or a better grade or opportunity or stronger performance evaluation or whatever it might be. Of course, unconscionable type of situation. Hopefully never happens, yet schools have to be prepared to address it should anything ever arise. This second one that's called hostile environment harassment, which really goes to any other type of conduct that might involve comments, might be involve propositioning, might be involve anything that you might think that has sexual connotations to it, behavior, whether it's between students, employees, or students and employees. If it is so severe and there's a pattern to it, pervasive, and it impacts somebody's ability to go to school, and typically it certainly would, that would fall under Title IX. And then these other very, very severe forms of sex-based conduct around assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking. The regulations under this rule from the federal government say, if these things are ever to happen in a school program or activity, the school has some very specific, detailed requirements that it has to follow. Here's what they are. Anytime a school has what's considered actual knowledge, they learn of a particular incident. And again, historically, district has done a very good job of training, not just administrators, training all employees to know if you're aware of any potential problem, whether it relates to sexual harassment or some other form of harassment or any form of bullying, anything that looks to be an unsafe condition for any one of our students or our employees, that you ought to report that. A report can go to the Title IX coordinator. The school is, the district is required to have one. That's Christine. And these regulations specify that that has to be identified. Christine's information has to be prominently posted on the website and reflected in the policies so people can access her if they need to get information there. Somebody with authority, which of course is all your school administrators, who would be able to respond to any issue that comes up, but also prominently, any school employee who learns of an issue needs to then bring that forward again to Christine or to the administration to address. There's some distinctions here between when somebody brings that information forward, does that launch an investigation? You actually need a formal complaint under Title IX for an investigation to get launched. So that would come from either the alleged victim, typically their parents, we're talking about minor students, but obviously from an employee, it'd be the employee themselves. Or Christine has that discretion. If she decides, even if I don't have a complaint from a victim here, I can decide this is important. We need to address this, under these rules. I'm going to step back for a second and say kind of what was the purpose behind these rules? Aren't we always addressing sexual harassment and bullying in all its forms? And the answer to that is yes. The school always has. It always has had procedures to do so. But these rules were an effort by the federal government to shift from what prior administration had taken an approach that was viewed as victim-centric, and there were concerns that responding parties weren't afforded sufficient due process rights in terms of their participation in an investigation, their opportunities to defend themselves, their ability to review all the evidence that might implicate them in some fashion, and essentially have, a robust set of ways in which to challenge any particular finding from a school investigation. Honestly, I feel as if most school districts, including 14, had a really good structure in terms of addressing that in the past. Nonetheless, under these rules, the government decided we have to expand the level of due process that people are afforded when they're accused of possible sexual harassment. That being things like making sure during an investigation both parties are treated equitably, that there not be a presumption of guilt at the outset without an investigation taking place, and stating that affirmatively, a reasonable time frame for completing the process, and then also when a complaint doesn't reach that definitions that I talked about, it's not the type of sexual harassment that would fall under Title IX because it doesn't reach that level of severity or didn't take place, let's say it didn't take place in a school program, that a school would then have to dismiss that under Title IX. And I want to caution you and point you to the bolded language at the end of this slide that says this. Even there are going to be times where something might not be considered sexual harassment under Title IX because, again, it didn't reach that level of severity, but it didn't take place in the context of a school program. It happened on a weekend or was between students in the summer, whatever it might be. Anytime the school believes something that might have happened that then creates an unsafe condition for those students there within school, or something that might have just been a offhanded comment somebody made, or an inappropriate statement or a text or whatever it might be, but it doesn't fall under that severity expectation under Title IX. We get this question all the time, which is, would the school still address it? And the answer is yes, they would. They just wouldn't necessarily under the detailed process that the Title IX rules set out and what your policy specifies when you're dealing with Title IX. It's a complicated set of circumstances. There's a lot to it, a lot to break down there that would take a lot more time. But I think the bottom line I want to leave you with, which is your administrators, and Christine and Chris and I have been talking about, administrators have received extensive training. They're going to get more training in these areas of how to conduct investigations and respond to situations. And the bottom line is, whether it's Title IX or not Title IX, if it's inappropriate conduct going on, we need to address it, and we need to make sure everybody feels safe and supported in their ability to go to school. Beyond that, there's a few other, as I mentioned, detailed procedures. I'm going to make this comment just because if folks were reading news or media reports about Title IX rules now say that there always has to be a live hearing, essentially a mini trial, where the parties can cross-examine each other when somebody's accused of sexual harassment. Well, the fact of the matter is that live hearing requirement only applies at the college and university level, does not apply K through 12. So that's an important consideration, and problematic enough and difficult enough when your board's convening and deals with hearings at times under state law, like expulsions and so forth. But nonetheless, this rule does not impose a hearing requirement on schools. This point about a decision maker can't be an investigator or the Title IX coordinator basically just means this, is that the rules set out a structure where there's multiple parties involved multiple individuals, where you have Christine as a Title IX coordinator, and then you would have an investigator and a decision maker who are not the same person. So the decision maker has an objective look after the evidence is gathered. And then, of course, remedies, discipline, other things that would happen after a decision is reached, and then parties that have an opportunity to appeal, which is typically the case. Those are the Title IX rules. That was probably a little longer, 20 plus minutes on just that, Janie. I want to I'll pause. Questions on that? I'd be happy to take any if there are.
I can't see anybody's, if anyone's raising their hand, so.
Okay, just say so if you do. I know it's a lot of information to throw at you. Janie, 10, 12 more minutes, would that
Sure.
be okay? Or 15
That's
or
great.
so on just the gender equity piece?
I would like to say, just before you begin, Christine and Lisa and I spent, what, 12 hours? It seemed like longer, with going through this. So for you to do a space shot kind of thing of everything is really remarkable.
And well, you're fortunate that you didn't have the 12 hours. You know what, Jenny, I'm glad you mentioned that. I talked about the administration training that's coming, Chris and Christina set up, but I should have said this. This does come from, we did, because these rules were so verbose and extensive, and the obligations were so profound here, we did a 4-part Zoom webinar. 3 of them were 3+ hours long, and the last one was 1.5 hours long. Chris, Christine, Janie all participated in the full breadth of the entire program. Remarkable. We had folks all across the state that were part of it. Again, a little bit of consternation of as if we didn't have enough to deal with at the school level right now, but nonetheless, folks really took hold of it. And again, kudos to the folks on how you've approached it. And I've talked to a few boards, but yours has, your district has really sort of embraced, let's make sure we're getting it right. Okay, so now I'm going to just shift gears slightly to what is in the state rules for state law with regard to school boards and your need to get annual gender equity training. Technically, what we just did and the focus around sexual harassment is a prominent aspect of that and largely would suffice. But I want to mention a few other pieces to gender equity briefly that just might, that hopefully will resonate. That law, on some level, I think the law is a bit dated. The requirement around gender equity training, what came out of the 1980s. If you think about gender equity equality issues, we're a different place, now than we were in the 1980s. Undoubtedly, there are still issues around gender-based discrimination and ensuring equity. But just, of course, the pictures are quite a bit different. Folks often sort of say, terminology, what does it mean, gender equity in some way? And how does that differ from a term, gender equality? I mean, gender equality tends to be equal, right? Equal treatment in certain ways. If you think about it just from the employment context, right? The Equal Pay Act actually establishes the fact that regardless of gender, people who do the same job with the same level of experience and fulfill the same functions ought to be paid equally. That's a clear example of that. Gender equity is a little different in terms of there might be differences in resources and supports that have to be provided for persons of different gender to ensure equality, to ensure access. I'll give you the best example is actually athletics that we just talked about, right? You have some sports teams, of course, that are for both boys and for girls. You have a boys soccer team, you have a girls soccer team, you have loads basketball, you have lots of sports like that. But then you have differences in sports as well between football and volleyball, right? Field hockey, and what it is that you provide in certain instances. And those are the idea around, you might provide different opportunities, but you're ensuring equity and opportunity for all of your students, regardless of gender. What is also related to the gender equity sort of concept here is it's reflected in another requirement under state law that you might know. Christine not only serves as assistant superintendent, Title IX coordinator. She's also the district's affirmative action officer. And there's probably 25 other hats I don't know about, Chris, but right, as far as what, as far as that role, the affirmative action officer is, specifically charged under state law with dealing with issues around not just gender equity, but discrimination as it relates to all categories, again, race, color, national origin, and so forth. But the gender equity piece is prominent as well.
Scott has a question.
Please.
So what happens, does gender equality also fall into, say you have a young man that wants to play volleyball, but volleyball is not actually offered as a school sport.
Right.
What do you do?
Great question, Scott. And it's actually a really complicated answer. That's not so straightforward, but I have to be honest with you. The way in which it still gets dressed as an equity issue. There are opportunities in which some schools land in different places, and there are different legal arguments to make depending upon how a school might look at that issue. And so rather than me giving you the straightforward answer, because honestly, if a boy wants to play volleyball or wants to play field hockey, we'd look at that and say that's quite possible that they'd be able to, but there'd be challenges to that on both sides that you'd have to think through. So I'd love to, I hate to table it, but I do want to tell you this, it's not a clear no-go. Okay, that's clearly, that's clearly the case in that instance. But there's definitely those types of issues that do come up and get thorny in terms of where does the school want to land. I've seen schools that, have said, listen, we can provide this opportunity, we ought to do it, right? And we don't provide the same opportunity for boys to be able to participate otherwise, and so we'll make that call. And there's plenty of schools that do that. When it comes to the gender equity piece, I want to just go back to my slide really quickly, if I can share that again. Okay, I talked enough about sort of generally non-discrimination, and I talked the grievance process, which is reflected in those policies I referenced, that there's essentially a complaint procedure, whether it's dealing with a Title IX issue or some other type of harassment issue that might not have the same level of process that the federal government says you have to follow when it comes to Title IX sexual harassment. Nonetheless, that procedure, and you've probably looked, when you looked at that -R procedure and saw it's 15, 16 pages now, it's because there's a complaint process for whichever form of discrimination might get raised. Comment or no? So there are other considerations as far as gender equity is concerned, specifically as it goes to your workforce and what happens with regard to our employees and how we look at gender equity issues, and then also how do we look at them with regard to our students. So let me just sort of break it down a little bit here. If we're talking about administrators, it's actually interesting. If you look at trend data and so forth, things have evolved quite often, quite to the point where I think when the rules came about, women were underrepresented in the administrative ranks by and large. Statewide now, women actually comprise more than half of principals statewide in Maine, which is significant, but significantly less with regard to assistant principals, for whatever that might mean to you. And then I don't think this is all that surprising to people, is that within those administrative roles, women are far more likely to serve in administrative roles in elementary school, and men are far more likely to serve in administrative roles in middle and high school. Same goes for teachers. When you look at the overall numbers, women, I think, comprise of a significant majority of teachers nationwide, but again, more centered in elementary school. But it's changing and it's shifted fairly significantly as well. I only share that information to say, under affirmative action plan, there's always just a look to say, how do we look from a trend standpoint, and what kind of changes are we making? And when we get, a male teacher who's interested in teaching elementary school, that's always a plus in terms of seeing that, or seeing women that teach in non-traditional areas, within middle and high school and so forth. And I think we've moved far, past the situation where expectations are, there are certain career areas or areas to teach assigned to people of particular gender. Beyond administrators and teachers, students, there's lots of pieces to this. And I know there's going to be some additional programming going on. And Christine shared with me the social emotional learning team and sort of the efforts that are going to go on working directly with teachers and others in how we address students to ensure gender equity. I mean, I mentioned the athletics piece already. Sometimes there's other extracurricular programs where students may very well, what they might participate in. You think through a debate team, or you think about unique teams like robotics or other type of leadership opportunities. And are, regardless of gender, are those students seeking those opportunities out? And how are they responding to, recruitment efforts, and are they broad-based? Lots of things that might get looked at. There are some issues with regard to specifically within the classroom sometimes, and I think that's what Christine shared with me, is some of the training from some specialists to really work with teachers around understanding implicit biases. And are there, certain biases that still might creep in? For instance, I already mentioned the part that, well, men and women obviously can pursue the same careers and teach in the same areas, but sometimes you still hear these, outdated views of, girls just they're not as good in math, or they don't want to, seek STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics related careers to the extent boys might do. Or boys might not be interested in the same vocational career exploration, let's say in a nursing program that women might, but there's plenty of male nurses out there, as we all well know. Those are kind of some of the considerations, and you never know what form they might take there within the classroom, and how students are generally being supported from an equitable standpoint, whether looking at, graduation and dropout rates and discipline, those break down by gender lines in different ways. But I think, the professional development that you have planned with that team that Christine talked about is really good, just to have, teachers be thinking about these issues and ensuring that, how you're making sure that there's an equitable approach to everybody's participation. And then lastly, I just want to sort of end where I started for a second here, where I talked about Title IX, which is about non-discrimination. There are other key laws. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits workplace discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, disability. And so they have additional protections employees do from any gender-based related restriction or not given the same level of opportunity. And then the Maine Human Rights Act is quite prominent in terms of state law, covering all these same protections as well. Why I mention these laws here is I just want to make, there's been quite a trend in the last several years of addressing protections for students on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity, as well as something that's called gender stereotyping. All of these aspects are covered and people are protected. Specifically, gender stereotyping, which is people not conforming to the stereotypical notions of how males or females are supposed to act or speak or dress or express themselves in any real way. And if somebody was targeted for that kind of behavior, that would be addressed under each one of these laws that we specified as a form of sex-based harassment. And notably, the Supreme Court just ruled under Title VII that employees are employees who are subjected to workplace discrimination on the basis of their sexual orientation or their gender identity are in fact protected under both Title VII, and they've actually always been protected under the Maine Human Rights Act. The way this plays out for students, of course, is, a transgender student or anybody who's a member of the LGBTQ plus community is protected from discrimination, harassment on those bases. Trans students, sometimes there's additional steps that have to be taken in terms of using pronouns that align with their preferred gender, or as opposed to the gender that was assigned to them at birth. Their access to, facilities like locker rooms and bathrooms and so forth. All of those are forms of rights that exist under these laws for those individuals. we raise it here because it has changed from the time gender equity was first established in the 80s as a required area of training. We've come a long way in terms of the breadth of how gender gets looked at and who's protected under these laws. And it's changed, I think most would say, you know, for the, it's had a real impact in terms of ensuring participation for these students and employees in ways in which they weren't entitled to before.
Alan,
that's my content, but please, Chris.
Alan, Christina has a question.
Yes.
Christina.
Hi, thank you. I had a question in regards to the gender stereotyping. Would that mean that, say, for example, our dress code would have to be applied equally to both men and women, and not like, these are the rules for girls and these are the rules for boys? Would that apply there or no?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right in terms of, again, now it's a little different, and I'm going to just distinguish here, for, if I could, Christina, right? If we're talking about a transgender person, someone who identifies differently, but you're just talking gender stereotyping in terms of how somebody expresses themselves or what they might tend to wear.
Well,
right?
Also, I've read our dress code. It's pretty subjective.
Yep.
So what someone might say is inappropriate for a girl might be not seen as inappropriate for a boy, even though it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Like a boy could typically get away with showing a little bit of his underwear, but maybe a woman couldn't. And I want to know if that falls onto the same.
So the gender stereotyping issue is less about kind of general rules, right, for everybody, and it's more about individuals, right? And so gender stereotyping tends to be like, here's how this person is treated. And if you had a student who says, I'm not comfortable with the requirements around the dress code for me in particular and how that applies, I think then you'd want to engage with that person. The administrator is probably going to work something out, right, to make sure that they're complying with what that dress code looks like. I only went to the transgender piece because that's broader. That's different in terms of, that's a dress code for boys and girls, which really becomes an issue of, well, okay, people have different views of who's a boy or who's a girl, but a trans male who was born female is a girl for all intent and purposes under state and federal law in school.
Okay.
So, good point.
Something for us to look at, though, Christina.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly worth looking at the code and see how it reads and if it raises concerns in any real way. But just off the top of my head, you know, to say this says to a boy, I can dress differently because of what the code says, I don't know that it's so directed to say, well, here's how girls can dress in some fashion. I think if that student's dressing in that way, right, and it's reflective of not just their identity or maybe their sexual orientation, how they're choosing to express themselves, I think you're looking at probably some form of protection, Christina, and you're going to want to find a way to support that student.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? This is a lot to take in, but it's very valuable information. And I'm glad you were able to present it so clearly and succinctly. Thank you.
Sure, Jenny. Happy to do so. Happy to take other questions at another time, or you know, Chris and Christine can always follow up. But thanks. Appreciate the opportunity. Good luck with everything.
Oh, thank you very much. You as well.
I'll jump off now. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, it's now time for Mr. Howell to present an update to the board about the MOU. And I like saying MOU. I'm just saying that.
That's okay. I'm actually texting the police chief and Officer Sear and Officer Forney to let them know that we are ready for them.
I see Matt is on, so.
Oh, there's Matt.
And there's Chief. Oh, there's Matt. Sorry.
Matt, did you text the chief?
I can.
I just texted him as well, just to let him know that we were ready to go.
It's got to go all the way to Topsom, so it might take a while.
Amazing how quickly a text message goes. Jenny, may we just give him 30 seconds, and if he's not here, then we'll get rolling.
Okay, are you timing or am I?
I can time.
Okay.
The chief just responded. He's on his way.
Okay.
Oh, we'll be right on. He just responded to me.
There you go.
And I'll just also mention for board members, we're actually excited to have Channel 7 back for carrying RSU 14 board meetings. So they are interacting with us as a Zoom partner. And by doing so, it allows our meetings to then be streamed over public access. So it's a great way to have our meetings back on Channel 7. So thank you to Brad for making that happen for us.
Thanks, Brad. I'd much rather see your face in the
in the control room.
In the control room, giving me a thumbs up or a, 3, 2, 1.
There's Officer Fournier.
Hi, Seth.
Hi.
And I will go ahead and I will get started while the police chief starts. So RSU 14 has had a long relationship with the Windham Police Department. And actually there's been an SRO at Windham High School even prior to us becoming RSU 14, back when it was the Windham School Department. An initial grant was received, I believe it was 2005, 2006. And an SRO was added at that time, and Jeff Smith served as that SRO. And it's been a great relationship. Officer Fournier, I think this is year 5, is that correct?
Sounds right.
As the school resource officer for Windham High School. In addition to that, through our relationship with the Windham School Department, the Windham School Department, Windham Police Department, and now into RSU 14, starting back with the Windham School Department, the police department gave us a community service officer who was Matt Sear, and provided that person in that position to do DARE programming, Dare to Adventure, to do summer and school year activities with students, as a funded position through the Windham Police Department. So it's been an officer on loan to us for now a number of years. And Matt, I don't know how many years exactly that you've been CSO.
Going on 21.
Wow.
So providing quite a wonderful resource to us. And so in fact, we've been almost operating like we've had 2 SROs over a period of time. So again, it's been a great relationship, and police administration have been super supportive of the schools, and anytime that we've had a request for either coverage or for help, either through our SRO or our CSO, that has been great. Just want to bring the board back to, I believe it was June, and previously to that, back beginning of the year, a group, Lynette Hain, worked with Officer Fournier, Officer Sear, and with the Windham Police Department to work on a Department of Justice grant for a COPS grant to receive an additional SRO. And as reported to the board back in June, we received an additional $120,000 grant to help fund a second SRO within the district. And so in working with our police chief, that second SRO will be have a duty station of Windham Middle School and Jordan Small Middle School. And part of the reasoning behind that is that, first of all, the town of Raymond, through this last budget, is paying for a portion of the new SRO position, because if you remember back to a budget time, the grant that we received paid for a majority of the new SRO position, but it didn't pay the full position. And so a portion of that is then fit into the RSU 14 budget. Raymond is paying for a portion, and so we wanted to make sure that there was coverage at both middle schools And so we're working out still with the Windham Police Department what coverage might look like. We'll also be working with the chief on a process for naming the next SRO to take over into that position. The Windham Police Chief has other plans now for community service officer and using that position to then interact with the public differently. And so that's really an internal Windham Police Department. As I mentioned earlier, that particular position was on loan to us now, Matt, I guess the last 21 years in which the SRO or the CSO was not being funded by us. So we are super, super excited for this grant funded position. And in order to be able to move forward with it, we have to then create a memorandum of understanding between the Windham Police Department, Windham Town Council, who oversees the Windham Police Department, and RSU 14. And really the whole purpose of that MOU is to create what are the base expectations, what can the RSU expect for coverage, and in turn, what can the Windham Police Department expect for communication for us back and forth between the department and what's happening here within the school. And so this summer, the chief and I and Officer Sear had a chance to sit down, work through the MOU, and make sure that we were filling in all the roles and responsibilities for this new SRO position. In addition, Officer Fournier, who the district previously had an MOU for that position, that MOU had expired. And so part of this new MOU, this memorandum of understanding, is to recapture those two positions into one, with the understanding that now 2 police officers will be on loan to RSU 14. So I know I've talked a lot, and I know that there might be some questions from board members or comments that either the police chief wants to make, or Officer Fournier or Officer Sear.
Good evening. I was a little late. I got a text from Chris that you guys are ready for me, and my tablet decided it needed to do some updates before it would let me log in. So that was the reason for my tardiness. But so I lost a little bit maybe of Chris's explanation of where we are, but with the new MOU, we are kind of doing 2 things. We're updating the one that had expired for our high school SRO program, and we took some steps, and after meeting with Matt and Seth, we've kind of incorporated both of those positions into one MOU. And another component of the MOU is, I think Chris may have informed you, we've written a grant to help cover the cost of this through the federal COPS FAST program, and an updated MOU is a component of this that we have to present to the COPS FAST folks at the Department of Justice. So that's what a little more background there.
Anybody have a question? Kate.
Just for clarity, the board will be voting on the MOU, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay.
And that will be our, go ahead, Kevin.
Just for the school board's edification, I believe, I don't think it's actually set yet, but I'm pretty sure that my town manager will want to put this in front of the town council next Tuesday evening, the 13th. So, but our town manager has reviewed it, made a few suggestions, and feel it's ready to present to the governing body as well.
And Kevin, I have checked with the manager, and it will be on their 13th agenda.
Okay, good.
And for board members, it will be on your agenda the 21st, so that we can finalize this and then have the opportunity to send this off to the Department of Justice. And then that would allow us to then start doing our drawdowns, or Windham Police Department, who is really the fiscal agent for this grant, for them to start doing their drawdowns for the position.
Anna?
I know you said it in another, I can't remember when I heard you say it, but I know I heard you say it. If you could just reiterate you had made a statement about the agreement with the Sheriff's Department, so that it's okay for this new SRO to come into Raymond and be part of our community here as well, for the throngs of listeners we have.
Kevin, do you want to handle that, or do you want me to?
I'll handle some of it. We have a strong work relationship with the Sheriff's Department, and there are already occasions where both Seth and Matt will work with the folks up in Raymond for emergency planning, security drills, and things to that nature. So that relationship and communication is already open. The Sheriff's Department is aware that we're working on this grant, and there'll be some probably some more added presence in the Raymond schools. But on our end, it's not anything that's going to look like a territorial issue or anything like that. So I don't know if that answers your question fully.
It does. Thank you. I know we had in Raymond, there were some questions about how that was going to work out. So we're really, really excited to start building that relationship in our schools here in Raymond as well, and really make it one district. So thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to.
And just one other piece with the grant is, I think something that's also been a benefit to us, that there have been SRO programs where the school district has been required to purchase a vehicle to handle the SRO and to support the SRO. Windham Police Department have provided all the equipment, materials, everything they need, vehicles for our SROs. In fact, I think the DARE vehicle that's currently being used is actually drug money that was confiscated, helped pay for that vehicle. So they will be providing those resources to us.
Pete?
All right, thank you. So just a couple of questions about the grant. First of all, how long is the grant for? How many years?
There's two components: a 3-year grant, and I believe it's $120,000 or $125,000.
All right. And so when I first heard about this, I thought it was a grant that the RSU secured, where the RSU was getting the money. But is this actually the police department that's getting the money?
This particular grant is through the police department in the town of Windham. Maybe the RSU did receive a significant amount of funding for some security related grant funds through the DOJ as well. So that might have been what you heard. But this particular grant is through the Windham Police Department in the town of Windham.
All right, great. So the SRO will continue to be an employee, so to speak, of the Windham Police Department.
Yeah, and just a little more background on logistically how we can make this work, a little bit from a legal standpoint. We do 3 things as law enforcement to give us some concurrent jurisdiction. The first thing is we have what's called statewide arrest powers. Not that that's really germane to the SRO program, although if we get into a situation where we do have to effect an arrest, we have statewide arrest powers that have been signed off on and approved by our city council. The next thing we have with all the Cumberland County law enforcement agencies is another written MOU for mutual aid. So if one agency has to ask for some help from another, it kind of clarifies certain roles and responsibilities and civil liabilities and things like that. And then finally, every Windham Police Department is also sworn in and deputized as a Cumberland County deputy, so we can all help each other out, because that's in addition to the school relationships, it's common for us to back one another up in sometimes cross jurisdictional boundaries to support one another. So that system is already in place if anyone had any questions about the jurisdictional component.
Was that it, Pete?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Scott?
Chief, I think I just heard you say that this is a 3-year grant. Is that correct?
It's 3 years or until we draw down the funds, which is, I believe, $125,000. And then once those funds are drawn down, there's at least a minimum of a 1-year commitment beyond that the town would have to take on to keep the position funded for at least 1 more year beyond the parameters of the grant.
So that would explain then why in the moratorium I see this position is extended through 24. Is that correct?
Yes, that would, well, that's in the MOU.
Yeah, I believe, yes.
Yeah, it is. It's 4 years. That may be one component of it. I think the other component of it is just we don't anticipate a lot of changes in the next 3.5 years or so. But the rules around the grant, these COPS Fast grants, is what they are. Is we were awarded the grant in July, so we have 3 years to draw down that money. And once we draw down the money, that we have to commit to that position for a minimum of 1 year beyond that.
So who commits? The town of Wyndham or the RSU?
The town of Wyndham has to commit.
Okay. All right.
And we can fund it beyond that, or does it, or does the program end entirely in 4 years?
Well, that'll have to be a policy decision at that time in terms of once the grant is exhausted, again, and then we commit to that 1 year, like where are we financially at that time? And some decisions may have to be made then. Like on the municipal end, typically, we would be looking at our staffing levels of where we are and work with our council to get the position funded. And frankly, if it didn't happen, we may lose a position or lose it to attrition or something like that with, pending retirements or resignations. So those decisions may need to be made in about 3 years. So.
But is this something that we, as a district, could fund?
Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. Would have to come up to some sort of an agreement with that.
Okay, all right. Mark? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to add that the position that Officer Fournier is in was originally a grant-funded position.
Yes.
And when that grant ran out, that the district then picked up a portion of that, and we now partner on that particular salary.
Okay.
Sorry, Marge.
Marge.
That's okay. Kevin, does this grant come up periodically, or is it a one-time grant?
No, they come up pretty frequently, almost annually. So we could reapply if that's what you're thinking.
Right. How proactive would we have to be on that application? Like in the 3rd year or what? How soon?
Well, we'll have to look at it probably the end of during fiscal year 22-23, if my math is right. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? I'd like to thank the 3 of you for coming and for all that you've done for the RSU. In any case, I appreciate more than I can say your service.
Well, thank you very much. But we've spoken to some other committees. Well, I have the entire school board here. Very strong relationship with the school system, and not only just through the administration of the entire school system. It's really strength of the department, and the school system is a really big component of both communities, really, and it's very important that we have this. So the ability to pick up the phone and speak to Chris and everyone else and work through problems has been a tremendous asset, and so there's a two-way street with the relationship. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Question, Jenny?
One more.
All right. Seth, do you know where I can get one of those I love my SRO signs?
It's funny. I feel like I need to do a better job because there's none of those in our town. Kurt Mazuzin is doing a great job in Cumberland, and I'm going to phone him and see if I can get you one, and I'll put it on your lawn specifically.
Okay, thank you.
I want one too. Okay. Thank you all. Next, we'll move to policies. Could I have a motion to approve the first revised reading of policy KLGA?
I move to approve the first revised reading of policy KLGA, school resource officer presence in the schools.
Second.
Moved by Kate and seconded by Marge. Any public comment? Any board discussion?
I just want to remark that the policy committee met, which includes Janie and Christina and Kate, myself, Chris, and Christine. And we met with the chief to review not only this policy, which, as has been discussed, has been revised to remove the community service officer component out, and it's strictly now SRO. In addition to reviewing this policy, we also just took a little peek, which was in your packet, for KLG, which is called Relations with Law Enforcement Authorities. And after reviewing that, which was approved on March 2nd, 2016, all agreed that there were no revisions necessary for that policy. So because this policy really was hugely revamped, we decided to proceed with a first reading and a second reading, being revised to give the public an opportunity to take a peek and for us to digest it. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? Okay, all those in favor?
Marge Scavone,
Yes.
Jenny Cummings,
Aye.
Kate Bricks,
Yes.
Kate Levier,
Yes.
Scott McLean,
Yay.
Jenny Butler,
Yes.
Anna Keeney,
Yes.
Pete Hensler,
Aye.
Christina Small.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. Thanks again. So could I have a report? Could I have a motion about the secretary's report? Marge.
I move to approve the minutes of the September 3rd, 2020 meeting.
Second.
It's been moved by Marge and seconded by Jenny. Any public comment? Any board discussion? All those in favor?
Marge Scavone,
Yes.
Jenny Cummings,
Aye.
Kate Bricks,
Yes.
Kate Levier,
Yes.
Scott McLean,
Yay.
Jenny Butler,
Yes.
Anna Keeney,
Yes.
Pete Hensler,
Aye.
Christina Small.
Yes.
Jenny, will you do the minutes of the 9th, please?
Yes. I move to approve the minutes of the September 9th, 2020 meeting.
Second.
It's been moved by Jenny, seconded by Marge. Any public comment? Any board discussion? All those in favor?
Marge Scavone,
Yes.
Jenny Cummings,
Aye.
Kate Bricks,
Yes.
Kate Levier,
Yes.
Scott McLean,
Yay.
Jenny Butler,
Yes.
Anna Keeney,
Yes.
Pete Hensler,
Aye.
Christina Small.
Yes.
The motion carries. Let's see. Anna, would you read the third motion, please?
I would love to, but I can't get the agenda to open up, so.
Okay. Christina, would you please?
I move to approve the minutes of the September 16th, 2020 meeting.
Second.
Second.
It's been moved by Christina, seconded by Scott. Any public comment? Any board discussion? I would like to say that I like the way the minutes reflected attendance and the public comments that were made and the board deliberations in the board discussion part of it. I appreciated that. So thank you. All those in favor?
Marge Scavone,
Yes.
Jenny Cummings,
Aye.
Kate Bricks,
Yes.
Kate Levier,
Yes.
Scott McLean,
Yay.
Jenny Butler,
Yes.
Anna Keeney,
Yes.
Pete Hensler,
Aye.
Christina Small.
Yes.
The motion carries. We now have committee reports. Anything from finance?
Finance has not met recently.
Facilities?
Facilities has not met recently.
Policy?
We just met and you just voted on it.
The curriculum has not met, but we will soon. Superintendent's report.
Sure, I have a couple things to share tonight. So first of all, I've been invited tomorrow to participate with Jeannie and Ryan with meal distribution for remote meals.
Oh.
And just a reminder to the public, anybody who might be watching tonight, that we have 425 students that are participating in academics this year remotely. And we are providing meals at several different distribution sites across the district. And in addition to that, we also have the opportunity to provide weekend meals. And we are anticipating tomorrow that we will be distributing a little over 2,000 meals for this upcoming weekend for remote families and for those who are accessing that program. It is actually requiring 2 full-size cargo vans full of food in order to be able to hit the distribution sites. And all of this is being allowed because of some of the waivers that allowed for eliminating some of the congregating feeding requirements and allowing us to feed people on weekends, and all of this is reimbursable. In addition, as the board and the public, I hope, are aware by now, that at least now through December 30th and maybe beyond, that all kids in all schools are eligible for free lunch. But to hit the 2,000 meal mark is amazing, and just a giant kudos to not only Jeannie and Ryan, but our entire food service staff. Not only are they providing this number of meals, but they're providing online ordering as well as some choice. And it's absolutely amazing what's happening with that. And so because of some of these removal of restrictions, Jeannie and I have been discussing, and A-Team will be taking up looking at some of the particulars. We are going to try to do remote learning this year on storm days. And so, Mr. Hensler, I know that's something that we have discussed on multiple occasions, and I know the board has brought up on multiple occasions, but right now with the waivers that are currently in place, it is allowable to now do remote learning on those days in which they're storm days. What we're trying to work out is, or what we will be working out is, how do we provide meals? How do we predict whether or not we're going to be here on a particular day? The proverbial snow day, how do we predict that well enough in advance so that kids will have access to breakfast and lunch prior to going home on any particular day that we may possibly have inclement weather? Next week Christina, you had a question?
Yeah, I was thinking about just now if that adds a element of liability where we're meeting them to pick up the meals, and we've taken all the vehicles off the road for safety. If having them come meet us to pick up those meals for that day causes an issue.
Christine, it's actually a great question. And what we talked about for our remote feeding is that the day before a storm, we would actually be providing extra meals.
Okay.
So that there would be extra take home. And in the event that the weather people blow it and we end up coming to school, that meal would just count towards an extra weekend meal that would be provided for a family. And we know at this point that these are all reimbursable meals. At our next board meeting, one of the things that I'm requesting that we talk about is calendar, because when we did our reopening plan, we had done a calendar through November. But looking at, first of all, within that calendar, the remote days, the snow days. In addition, and I know Marge has a question, in addition, November 3rd was scheduled that Wyndham High School and Jordan Small would be closed for voting. And when we meet next time, we'll have an opportunity for some board discussion, but would like to propose that November 3rd become a remote day for Jordan Small and for Wyndham High School. And that then becomes an opportunity for us to try distributing meals the day prior, and would give us a good understanding as a pilot, how do we do a snow day when we have some students that will be in remote the following day, so that those particular schools do not then have to go an extra day. So Marge, you had a question before I started that.
I did. When you were talking about snow days and feeding the kids on the snow days, when you say that, you're not talking about just the kids who are virtual in the home anyway. You're talking about every student in the school that Okay, that's a lot. Okay, thank you.
Jeannie has some ideas for, first of all, I can't say it enough. The food service staff that you have serving your students is cannot be compared to anyone else in the state. They are absolutely amazing. They are willing to try anything, and they have some ideas for what they could do for storm packs for students and for families. And Jeannie and Ryan, we had an impromptu meeting in the hallway outside my office this afternoon, and they are up for the challenge. And I think that November 3rd would be a great opportunity for us to try some things out. It would then also permit us to stay on schedule for those students for those days, to be able to have a remote day, but then also look at remote feeding. And is this something that we would be able to reliably do and meet the needs of our students on a snow day? But the current waivers, everything is in place that would allow this to happen. I've actually had a couple parents already reach out and ask questions about, given now some of our experience that we've had and getting some expertise now in remote, is this something that we can do? But we'll have opportunity to look at that calendar and to look at some of the impact of this at our next board meeting. So I know that's one thing I'd like to ask leadership of, to have some time. In addition, we have some information that we'll be sending out mid to end of next week, as we look to hit the 1st of November, because that was the spot where we said to families, if you're going to be staying remote, we want you to stay in remote, or if you're going to hybrid, but giving them an opportunity if they wanted to go one way or the other in the 1st of November, starting with that communication, but again, having that opportunity to discuss with the board. Here's how the first 6 weeks have gone. Here are some bright shining lights. Here are some challenges and some things we have. And here are some things that we're looking at possibly with the transition. So it should be a good discussion at the next board meeting. We've learned a lot, and I really want to share some of that and have Christine have an opportunity to share as well with that. So some pieces with that. As I mentioned earlier, TV7 is now going to be joining us for board meetings. So the Zoom meeting that we have right now is hopefully going out over public access as we speak. And so being able to broaden our expanse. And so it also means, I think the board meetings will now be on reruns for public access. So if you want to get a chance to see how Zoom translates, this would be a good opportunity to maybe catch one of the reruns on Channel 7. And then lastly, and it actually should have been first, but this Friday, our educators are going to be participating and providing in a number of well thought out, well planned out opportunities to look at student equity, diversity, and some of the challenges that go along with that. Christine and Christine have done an absolutely outstanding job of bringing in speakers from not only across the state, but from across the country to be working with staff and giving some choice opportunities and even some of our own homegrown expertise and looking at some important topics for us. And so we are going to be doing the entire day via Zoom. But I'm looking forward to the professional development that will have us a chance to not only look at ourselves and our practice, but our practices as a district and how we work through things. And so just thank you to Christine and to all of our other RSU 14 employees who've worked to make that happen.
Chris, if we wanted to participate in that, I know that we can. Can you tell us how we do that? Is there a Zoom link somewhere that we can access?
Christine, do you want to share out the Zoom links?
Sure. So tomorrow I'm sending to all staff and the facilitators and administrators the Zoom links. It'll be a document PDF that'll have all the sessions with the links embedded, so I can include the full board in that mailing. By tomorrow afternoon, we'll have that rolling out to the masses. So we'll include you folks.
Speaking of that, could we hop in to different ones, or do we need to, or is that a possibility?
I think, so the opening keynote,
we
have a speaker from far away, I think participating in that, and then the implicit bias training. That's for everyone. So that's one Zoom link. And then you have 6 choice Zoom links, Janie,
Right.
that you could read the session description, see which one's interesting, and then hop on that Zoom link.
Okay. My question is, could we listen for a while in one and listen, then go to another and listen for a while? I mean, they're all interesting, honestly. They're all fascinating, and I'd like to, I mean, of course, you wouldn't be able to do that, but I'd like to see more of them.
We do have permission from all of the facilitators to record them. So our goal is to record all of them and then get them on the PJPD site that Christine Hessler manages, so that many staff reached out and said, I can't decide which one. And we said, we'll work on trying to get them recorded. So we do have permission to do that. So we can get that out to you folks as well.
That's wonderful. That's great. All right. Any questions or comments? Thank you. It's now time for the board roundtable. Anyone have something they want to address the community about? Okay, nobody's leaping to do that. So could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Kate and seconded by Pete or Scott?
No, that was Pete.
Pete. All those in favor?
Mark Scavone,
Yes.
Janie Cummings,
Aye.
Kate Bricks,
Yes.
Kate Levier,
Yes.
Jenny Butler,
Yes.
Anna Keeney,
Yes.
Pete Hensler,
Aye.
Christina Small.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Who didn't vote?
Me.
Scott didn't vote?
No, you didn't call me.
Scott McLean. Sorry, Scott.
That means he has to stay.
No.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
Can we be there when you tell Lily about the days, the snow days?
I almost called her in. I almost did.
I could see you.
She's gonna be mad.
I know. Well, thanks everyone, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right, see ya.
No
Night.
more skiing.